It's April 1945. The air smells like wet ash and spent diesel. I'm standing in the mud, rain coming down in sheets, my boots soaked through, my hands numb at the wrists. And somewhere behind me, 14 months of the worst kind of tired a human body can carry. Not the tired that sleep fixes, the kind that settles into your bones like concrete and just lives there. 3 months ago, I had been stocking shelves in a hardware store in rural Ohio. I had never fired a weapon before the army handed me one. I had never seen a man die. I had never slept in a ditch in freezing rain or eaten cold beans from a tin in the dark while artillery shook the earth around me like God was trying to knock something loose. But I had done all of those things now, many times over, and on this particular afternoon, on a muddy road somewhere in Western Germany, I was standing maybe 30 feet from the most surreal thing I had ever seen in my life. In the middle of a landscape that looked like God had cleared his throat and forgotten to stop, in the middle of rubble and ash and broken walls and the kind of silence that only comes after a place has been destroyed and the destruction has moved on to somewhere else, there was a car, not just any car, a polished black limousine, paint so dark it mirrored the grey sky above it, not a scratch on it, not a speck of mud on the wheels, engine off, perfectly, defiantly still, and inside it, sitting with the posture of a man attending a formal dinner, was a German general. I will never forget the look on his face when he rolled down that window. He was not scared, he was offended. My name is James Walker, and I was there that day. I don't tell this story because I'm proud of what I saw, or because I think war is something to be celebrated. I tell it because for the better part of 50 years I kept it mostly to myself, the way men of my generation kept most things. We came home. We didn't talk about it. We got jobs and raised kids and mowed our lawns and tried very hard to be normal. And the things we had seen quietly followed us around like shadows we had learned to stop looking at. But this story won't leave me alone. It never has, because what happened on that road in April 1945 wasn't just a military moment. It wasn't just one general getting pulled out of a car. It was something larger than that. Something I've spent the better part of my adult life trying to find the right words for. And I think finally I might have them. It was the sound of a world cracking at the spine. And I had a front row seat. To understand what that moment meant, you have to understand who was standing in that rain. We were not warriors in any classical sense of the word. Nobody had handed us a military philosophy at birth. Nobody had told us we were descended from greatness or that our bloodlines connected us to any grand tradition. The kid standing to my left that day, Tommy Briggs, had been fixing car engines in Birmingham, Alabama, still had grease under his fingernails that 2 years of army soap had never fully gotten out. The man to my right, a quiet guy from Pennsylvania named Delbert, had been studying to be an accountant. We were grocers and mechanics and students and farm boys. We were the sons of immigrants and sharecroppers and factory workers. We were not elegant. We were not bred for anything except surviving whatever life put in front of us. And for 14 months, life had been putting a lot in front of us. I won't glamorize it. War movies do enough of that. What I will tell you is what it actually felt like from inside it. It felt like being permanently exhausted in a way that went beyond the body. It felt like learning very quickly that death did not come with warning or fairness or narrative logic. Your friend was there, then he wasn't. Mid-sentence, without drama, just gone. And you kept moving because stopping wasn't an option, and you filed it somewhere in the back of yourself where you knew it would wait for you, patient and permanent, for the rest of your life. We were done. All of us. Bone-tired and grief-soaked and done. The finish line was close enough to almost see. We didn't want medals. We didn't want speeches. We wanted to sleep in a real bed and eat something that didn't come out of a tin. We wanted to go home. That was the entire content of our ambition in that moment. Home. And then Patton's jeep came roaring up the road. I need to tell you about the German general first, because without understanding him, what happened next won't carry its full weight. He was Prussian military aristocracy, the kind that didn't just join the army, the kind that was born into it the way other people are born into a trade or a name. His people traced their military lineage back to Frederick the Great. They had been studying war as a discipline, as an expression of civilization's highest refinement for generations. They read Clausewitz the way a priest reads scripture. They spoke 4 languages. They wore monocles not because their eyes required them, but because the monocle said something about who they were and what category of person had entered the room. When men like this looked at us, they didn't see soldiers. They saw a mob. An undisciplined, chewing gum cracking, casually saluting horde of civilians in uniform. That phrase, mongrel horde, appears in actual German officer correspondence from this period. They meant every syllable of it. The sloppy salutes bothered them. The way American officers talked to enlisted men like they were people bothered them. The mass-produced uniforms bothered them. All of it confirmed what they already believed, that Americans were soft businessmen playing dress-up, and that whatever was happening to Germany had nothing to do with being outfought. They had simply been buried under an avalanche of inferior material, piloted by inferior men. The general in that limousine genuinely believed this. His country was on fire just over the horizon. He could smell it. The entire world he had been born into was ash and rubble and retreating columns. And sitting in that car in that rain, he was worried about the protocol of his surrender. He wanted a formal ceremony, rank acknowledged, dignity preserved, the proper choreography of a defeated officer of his stature being received by an equal. He was waiting for someone of sufficient rank to come and give him what he believed he was owed. He had no idea what was coming up the road. He saw the pits. He saw what was in the pits. He saw the survivors, men and women who had been reduced by deliberate, systematic, industrial brutality to something barely recognizable as human. He stood in there, and he was physically ill. This man who had planned the annihilation of entire armies without losing sleep stood in that camp and could not hold himself together. He vomited. He made his officers walk through it, every single one. He made the mayor of the nearby German town walk through it. He wanted no one to have the luxury of not knowing, and 4 days later he was standing at a car window, looking at a man in a pressed uniform, demanding ceremonial respect. I did not know this that day, but Patton knew it. He was carrying it with every step he took toward that car. His patience was not just tactically short, it was morally exhausted in a way that went below anger, below fury, all the way down to something colder and more permanent, an arctic, immovable certainty. That man's dignity was not something the moment owed him. I heard the jeep before I saw it, that particular engine sound, higher and meaner than a staff car. It came up the road fast and stopped hard in the mud, and Patton stepped out. I had seen him before, at a distance, the way you see a general when you're a private, but I had never been this close. He was wearing his helmet with the 4 stars, wearing his revolvers, the ivory-handled ones. His boots hit the mud with a sound I still remember, not a splash, a thud, the sound of wet clay accepting weight reluctantly. He didn't look around, didn't adjust his jacket, didn't check in with anyone. His eyes went to that limousine the way a man's eyes go to something he has already decided about. He walked toward it, steady, no drama. The rain kept falling, soft, steady, indifferent. The silence on that road had texture. You could hear the rain against the car roof. You could hear someone's equipment shifting, the creak of leather. You could hear the half-held breathing of 20 men who were watching something and weren't entirely sure yet what it was going to become. The general rolled down his window. He had rehearsed this. You could see it, the straight spine, the clipped cadence, the voice trained since childhood to carry weight in a room. He spoke in German, and the interpreter relayed it in pieces. He wanted formal proceedings. He wanted acknowledgement of his rank. He wanted the transaction to look a certain way. I watched Patton's face during those few seconds while the interpreter spoke. It was not rage. People always assume it was rage with Patton. But what I saw was something colder than rage and more deliberate. It was the expression of a man watching something that doesn't know yet that it's already over. Flat, patient, completely, utterly unmoved. When he spoke, he didn't shout. That's the part the stories always get wrong. The real Patton in the real moments was not loud. He was low, gravelly, precise, the way a good surgeon makes a cut. No wasted motion, no theatre, just the clean, exact application of enough force to do what needed to be done. I couldn't hear every word from where I stood, but I heard the shape of it. He told that general what his superior culture had produced. He named it plainly. He told him what rank meant now, in a Germany that his own ideology had turned into ash and body pits. He told him what the mud outside his door represented, not just the literal mud, all of it. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The words landed the way cold water lands, not painful, just suddenly, completely real. He did not wait for a response. He turned to us, military police. His voice was flat, final. One order, short enough to fit in a single breath. I followed that order. We reached into that car and we pulled that general out, not gently. Not with ceremony or care or any of the choreography he had been expecting. We pulled him the way you pull something out that does not belong where it is. And we put him in the mud. The February cold, grey German mud. The same mud Tommy Briggs and Delbert and I and every other farm kid and mechanic had been sleeping in and eating in and bleeding in for 11 months. The mud that had never cared about anyone's bloodline. The mud that did not know the difference between a Prussian aristocrat and a 20-year-old hardware store clerk from Ohio. The limousine was shoved off the road. It went into the ditch with a sound I have never fully forgotten, a groan of metal, the soft collapse of something that had been held upright by circumstance and was now simply done. I want to be honest about what I felt standing there. I did not feel triumph. I have thought about this carefully over many decades, turned it over and looked at it from every angle, and triumph is not the right word. What I felt was something quieter than that and more lasting. It was recognition, the sudden, total recognition of something I had understood in my body for a long time but had never been able to articulate. That the world where certain men stayed clean while other men died in the dirt, that world was over. The rules of the old order, the ones that said rank and breeding and bloodline entitled you to be shielded from consequence, to be treated as above the mud, to be received with ceremony while the farm boys and mechanics buried their friends in wet holes. Those rules had just been cancelled. Right there, in the rain, without a speech. Patton didn't say any of this. He didn't need to. He said it with the order, with that flat, precise, final instruction to his military police, and every one of us standing on that road understood it in the same instant. People reduce Patton to a catchphrase, a slap, a poster, an ivory revolver. They forget that at night in his tent, by lamplight, this man was reading the same German military texts the general had memorized. He knew their tradition. He knew their philosophy. He knew exactly how their minds worked. And he knew something else. Something that most people in positions of power never figure out. He knew that if you allow a defeated ideology to retain its pride, you have not defeated it. You have only paused it. The general, dignity intact, sitting in a formal surrender ceremony, rank acknowledged, uniform pressed, would go back to his story. He would construct a narrative in which he had not been broken, only inconvenienced, temporarily disadvantaged by circumstance. He would pass that story to his children, and his children would pass it to their children, and 40 years later, some version of that story would be used to explain why the defeat had never been a real defeat at all. Patton had read enough history to know this. He had seen how these men processed loss. He knew they needed to feel the mud, not as cruelty, as truth. Because liberation is not just about moving lines on a map. It is about what happens inside people's heads when the fighting stops. You can take every city and still lose if the men responsible walk away, still believing they were right. Patton was not just fighting for territory. He was fighting for the terms on which the peace would be built. He refused to give them 1 inch of psychological ground. I went home in the fall of 1945, got off the train. My mother hugged me for a long time without saying anything. Smart woman. I got a job, got married, had children, mowed my lawn, tried to be normal in the way that men of my generation tried to be normal, which is to say I tried to act like none of it had happened until I couldn't. But that moment on the road, that sound of the limousine going into the ditch, that particular groan of metal and the soft thud of it settling, that stayed with me in a different way than the grief stayed with me. It didn't haunt me, it anchored me. Because what I witnessed on that road was not just a military transaction, it was a statement about what the world actually owed people and what it did not. It was a statement about the relationship between power and accountability. It was a statement delivered without ceremony, in the rain, on a muddy road, by a man who had walked through Ordruf 4 days earlier and had not looked away from what he saw. Power without accountability is just cruelty with better furniture. I didn't have those words then. I was 20 years old, and I had grease from the Jeep on my hands, and I wanted to go home. But that was what Patton said that afternoon, without saying a word of it out loud. Here is what I know now that I didn't know then. History is not made in the grand gestures, the speeches, the surrender ceremonies, the photographs on battleships. Those are the packaging. The actual history, the stuff that changes what people believe about themselves and each other and about what the world is made of, that happens on muddy roads in the rain. It happens in the moments that nobody is officially recording. It happens when a man in a pressed uniform expects deference and gets mud instead. It happens when a flat, gravelly, 4-word order cuts through all the ceremony and theatre and manufactured dignity and gets straight to the truth of what this moment actually is and what it means and who it belongs to. Those American soldiers, the grocers and the mechanics and the farm boys and the accountants in training, they didn't get a monument on that road. They got the thing better than a monument. They got a man who understood in his bones that their mud-covered boots were worth more than everything in that limousine, and he said so, without words, in the only language that particular moment understood. I am an old man. Most of the men who were on that road are gone. Tommy Briggs died in 1987. Delbert made it to 2001. I have outlasted almost everyone who was standing in that rain with me, and I find that the older I get, the less patience I have for the polished version of things, for the cleaned-up story, for the version that keeps all the mud off and makes everyone look a little more dignified than they actually were. The real story, the true one, is messier and darker and more human than the polished version. It has a man vomiting in a death camp. It has farm boys who never fully slept right again. It has a limousine in a ditch and a general with mud on his uniform and a flat, precise order given in the rain by a man who was carrying a weight that I only understood later. That is the story I carry, not because it's comfortable, because it's true. And because I believe, with the certainty of a man who was there, that truth told plainly, without the polish, is the only version that actually means anything. The mud didn't care about anyone's medals, and neither, that afternoon in April 1945, did Patton.